Welcome to the International School of Tailoring. My name is Reza, and this is going to be your 29th lesson of our How to Make a Bespoke Jacket series. In the previous lesson, we basted our shoulders. It is now time to put our undercollar on. But before we do that, I will have to cover with you the fundamentals of colors. Regardless of the style, any color that is designed to hug the human neck is based on the same principle. So today's lesson is going to be about the theory of colors. Now, instead of taking a color and showing you how to put one on, I'm going to take a very different approach. I'm going to focus on the neck and the shoulder area and the covering thereof. Out of that process, the color will emerge. And so this lesson is going to be very technical, but also universally applicable to any design or style that you may be working on, including the jacket that we're going to make together. So this is what we're going to do. First, we're going to simplify the neck and the shoulders. Then we're going to cover that area. And then last but not least, we're going to relate that to the actual color of a real jacket and draft the color together. You ready? Let's go. All right, let's begin by simplifying the neck and the shoulders into 3 building blocks. Whenever we do that, we get something like this. The first building block is going to be a cylinder. That's the upper part of our neck. The second building block is going to be a tapered cylinder, which is wider at the base. And the third building block is simply going to be a block to represent the shoulders and the torso. Whenever we are trying to create a collar, what we want to do is to cover this middle block. We're going to call this middle block the transition block because it allows the cylinder to transition into the torso and the shoulders. Now, most neck points on shirts and jackets find their location right at the base of this transition block. So if I would draw out a neck curve, center front or center back, shoulder and armhole, you would see that the neck point is right at the base of our building block. Let's go ahead and try to create a pattern which is going to turn into our collar for this neck. We would begin with a straight rectangular strip, just as our starting point. Whenever we wrap this around the transition block, what we would notice is that we have these gaps right at the top of the collar. Why is that? Well, the answer is simple. Whenever you wrap around a straight rectangular strip around itself, it's just going to result in a cylinder. And the sides of that cylinder are straight. But we don't want that. We want a tapered cylinder. So what do? Well, imagine we would pinch away and cut out these surpluses that we have at the top. If we would translate that action into our pattern, we would have these V-cuts. Removing the V-cuts and closing our strip is going to result in a curved strip. Whenever you wrap this curved strip around itself, it's going to make a tapered cylinder, which is exactly what we need to cover the transition block right here of our simplified body. This curved strip becomes the stand of our collar. Now, our collar has 2 pieces to it. The first one is the stand. The second piece is the fall. So a 2-piece collar is also referred to as a stand and a fall collar. What is the fall? Well, the fall is what you are seeing here on my shirt. The stand is hidden underneath it. So the fall covers the stand. It falls over the stand. If I would overlap the two, you would just see the exact same pattern, but the fall is just a little bit wider to cover this bottom edge of the stand. This bottom edge of the stand is what is sewn to the neck circle of our jacket. If I would draw out the patterns of these two separately, we would have the stand here. We would call this the edge of stand. And this line here is going to be called the break line because that's the line from which the fall breaks and falls over the stand. And if I would draw out the pattern for the fall, you'll see exactly the same pattern, just a little bit wider, again with a break line, because they are going to be joined right on the same seam, so they share that seam together. And here we're going to call this the edge of fall. Most of you have seen a stand in a fall color in a pattern cutting book or on, I don't know, Pinterest or something. And what you've seen most of the time is, for example, a shirt color. Here we have the stand, buttonhole, and then the fall is usually mirrored upwards like this. And depending on the design, it's shaped according to whatever line we have. So what you see here is a shirt color, and I'm sure that you can see the resemblances between what I've created here. The only difference is that the fall here is flipped upwards, but whenever they are joined, the fall just falls down and covers the stand. Now, something I have to note is that these edges of the fall can be shaped to whatever design specification you have. It won't affect the shape of the tapered cylinder. So you can create whatever design you want if you want to get fancy, and it won't affect the technical structure of the color. However, if you start to mess around with these break line curves, then you are changing the severeness of this taper. Before we focus on the severity of the taper, let's just recap everything in the real world and see how this scenario plays out with actual real materials. So we're at the mannequin, and I want you to do two things for me. First of all, ignore this seam that we have right on the neck, because that was put by the company that made this mannequin and it's not relevant to my explanation. The second thing is to look at this green strip that I've sewn on the fabric, and that is our transition block. Now, this is of course a mannequin with a lot of curves, and you may wonder where the transitional block on your mannequin or on your neck would be. My answer is there is a range. Sometimes it's slightly lower, sometimes it's slightly higher. Usually, on average, it's right in the middle where the neck curves into the shoulder. Having said that, let's begin by covering our transition block with our first pattern, which is our straight strip. Whenever we align the edge of our stand with the base of the transition block, like that, what you will notice, first of all, is that the stand is standing straight. And there is, like I mentioned, those big surpluses that we have right on top of the collar. It's here on the sides and on the back. This is not because I'm holding it loosely. If I would hold it tight, the pattern would simply just fade away, drift away from the actual curve. So aligning it with the curve results in these surpluses. If I would pinch all of these surpluses out and create a new pattern, what I would do is create this new pattern. Okay, now when I wrap this around, because we have created a curve, it fits nice and tight around the neck. Here you can see the tapered effect. It's narrower at the top and wider at the base. Now if we go and add the fall to it, we will end up with a two-piece collar, which is a stand and a fall. And because these two have the exact same shape, aligning the collar now with our transition block again results in a tapered cylinder. So we have done what we had to do. Now I want you to pay attention to one other thing. Here we have a straight line, and then we have a break and it angles into the shoulder. However, whenever you look at our mannequin, it has a curve. How can we create a smooth curve on the surface of our collar? Well, so far we have learned about relative length and surfaces. This is a surface with a negative curve. It is concave and convex at the same time. So what we have to do is to take our two-piece collar and add additional length here, because a negative surface requires the addition of a wedge or the stretching out with the iron. And so as this goes lower into the negative curve, it requires more and more length right on the edge here. So if I would make snips into the fall and then place this on top of the neck, you would see that not only do we have a tapered cylinder, but we also have a tapered cylinder with a curve right on the surface. The higher I go, the further away I go from the negative curve and the less these wedges open. The lower I go, the further I go into the negative surface, and that opens up the wedges a lot more. If you understood what I just demonstrated, along with the examples I gave you here, it's safe to say that you understand the fundamentals of colors, and you can use that knowledge for all different types of color styles that you may be working on. Now, let's relate what we learned to the actual color of the jacket that we're about to make. We are going to use a one-piece color for our jacket. What is a one-piece color? Well, it's made of one piece instead of two pieces. How do we make a one-piece color? Simple. We take the fall, like so, and we're going to add the stand to it, like that. And when I say add, I mean on paper, on the pattern, not later, not as a seam. Just add it on. That is now one pattern with a concave fold line on the surface. Although this is a one-piece color, we are going to manipulate it to achieve the exact same shape that we got with our two-piece color, because we are still covering the same surface. Now, if you've seen the lesson on edge to fold transfers, you would be sharp and notice that here we have a concave line which is going to become our fold line. And this fold line is on the surface, whereas here it's on the edge, okay? What we have to do is to fold our material back and maintain this concave fold. To do that, as I explained in that lesson, go watch it if you haven't, we have to stretch our stand so that when the stand folds back, the edge of the stand runs parallel to the fold and the fold is concave. It's very important for us to maintain the concave form of our fold because it's that concave fold that gives us the tapered cylinder which we need to cover the neck. Okay? Now let's see how this works on our real materials. Here we have an example of a one-piece collar. Now, this is not the exact same shape as the collar of our jacket, but it should be sufficient to demonstrate the principle. We have our fall, and attached to it in one piece is the stand, and right between them is the concave fold line, our break line. What we have to do is to fold our collar along the break line. But when we try to do that, what you'll notice is that I have to stretch this material to really get it to curve around on the fold. What I have to do to make this possible is to stretch this material out right on the stand. And the reason why I have this color cut on the bias is so that the stretching becomes easier. So let me go ahead and stretch it out. I'm going to apply some moisture to make it pliable, and then I'm going to move my iron and pull the material. Now, I'm not going to go over the break line because I don't want to flatten the entire strip. I just want to stretch out the stand, and our stretching has to be relative. Now, as you can see, I'm transferring that concave shape that we had on the edge by stretching it out with the iron, and all of that shape is now going to go onto the surface of our material. And that makes our break line a straight line. Now, if you're wondering how much should I stretch, as long as it becomes straight, that's pretty sufficient. Sometimes you can stretch a little bit more to make sure you're stretching out all the fibers so that you can fold it back. Now, if I fold this back, very easily, let me turn it around for you, very easily does this fall along the concave break line, like so. Now I'm going to crease this down. I've stretched out the stand, and now I can easily crease it along my concave break line and maintain a break line that is concave. If I bring the paper example that we used earlier of the two-piece collar, you can see that we have pretty much created the exact same shape. We have a concave strip right here, and if I would open this up like so, what you will see is a surface with a negative curve. It is a saddle, concave, convex at the same time. The same goes for the paper version of the two-piece collar. You may wonder, why would we use a one-piece collar if we already had a two-piece collar? Well, there are three reasons for that. The first is waste management. If you have to cut out these pieces, these curves, and lay them out on your fabric, you're going to have a lot of dead space because they don't fit into one another like two squares would. And so you're going to have a lot of waste. The second reason is time management. If you have to cut out two panels, you actually have to cut them out, and that's going to require extra time. And also you have to put them together. So another step is added to go to the machine and assemble the two. The third reason is aesthetics. Maybe whenever you lift up your fall, you don't want to see a seam right on the break line, and you want everything to be smooth and seamless. Those are the reasons. Now, you can also ask the reverse and say, hold on, if everything could be achieved with the one-piece collar, why would I ever need a two-piece collar? The answer to that is that sometimes you have a collar that has a very severe curve on the break line. It's almost like a half circle. And if you have to stretch that with a one-piece collar, as we did, there's only so much that your material is going to give, even if it's cut on the bias. So in those cases, you will have to use a two-piece collar. Now that we've covered the things we have, there is one more important factor to cover with you and to understand. And that is the question of how severe should the curve of my break line be? Because we have already established that it's this curve that creates a tapered cylinder. The curve of your break line is determined and influenced, so both of them at the same time, by four factors. Factor number one is, of course, the squareness of the shoulder angles. Factor number two is the first button position where the break line leads to. Factor number three is the shaping of the material itself. And factor number four is the width of your fall. Let's cover each one of them one by one. To understand this factor really well, we have to refer back to our simplified mannequin with the transitional block between the neck and the torso. There are two types of shoulders for the sake of this explanation, square ones and sloping ones. If we look at the person with the very square shoulders, like so, and I'm exaggerating, of course, to highlight what I'm explaining to you, and we connect their neck with their shoulders to create a transitional block, what you would notice is that the tapered cylinder that we have around their neck as a transitional block is very severe. It's very narrow at the top and very wide at the base. That means that if we take our straight rectangular strip and we wrap it around their neck, the gap at the top of our collar is going to be very big, which means that these V-cuts, if we take them out, of course, these V-cuts are going to be larger as well. That means that we are closing the top edge of our stand, which is becoming the break line, a lot more, and that results, of course, in a more severe curve on the break line. On the other hand, if we look at the person with the sloping shoulders, like so, again, I'm exaggerating, and we connect their neck to their shoulders to create a transitional block. What you will notice here is that the taper on this person's transition block is a lot less. It's almost as wide at the top as it is at the base. It's almost a straight cylinder. So wrapping our straight rectangular strip around this person's neck is going to result in smaller gaps at the top edge of the collar. So these V-cuts are going to be smaller, and thereby we're going to close the top less, and so the result is going to be a less severe curve. As long as we respect everyone's anatomy, we are all going to end up as happy individuals. Here we have our mannequin, and on the back neck of our mannequin, we have two green lines. The lower line represents the edge of the stand, and the upper line represents the break line. Together as a whole, they represent the stand of the collar. Now, our stand takes two different paths from the shoulder seams onwards. The blue path is for a jacket with a high button, and the red path is for a jacket with a low button. If I take my color and I put this around the neck of my mannequin, we can see that the color follows the blue path. So if I intend to use this color on a jacket with a high button, then it's an appropriate color. However, if my jacket has a low button and thereby a lower break line, because the break line of the jacket always goes to the first button, I can't simply just force this over and then baste it down. That's not what this color is cut for. If I do that, I'm going to have a lot of surplus on my fall. So what do? Well, I allow the collar to sit at its current position. Then I'm going to take a piece of chalk and I'm going to follow the break line of the lower button and I'm going to draw a new break line for my collar and fade that into 0 right at the back neck. When I do that, you will notice that I have reduced the amount of curve on my break line. It is a straighter line. If I would fold my break line to that new line, my collar can simply sit on the new break line without any surpluses. Keep in mind that you do have to have enough inlay on your fall, because otherwise you're going to fall short. On the other hand, if my collar follows the red line and I want it to go to the blue line, I can't force my collar to the blue line because that creates surplus on the break line. So what I do, again, I allow the collar to fall in its current position, and then I'm going to measure how much I have to add at the ends of my collar break line. And then I'm going to fade that into 0 again at the back neck. And if I do that, for example, by now rolling it outwards, I am actually increasing the severity of the curve on my break line. So we can conclude that a high button requires a more severe curve and a low button requires a less severe curve. One of the very important things that we have to understand about making a garment is that paper patterns don't always behave the same as our materials. In the case of colors, what will happen is that we would create a curve depending on the factors that I've discussed with you, and we expect that curve to give a certain effect. However, when it comes down to the practical aspect, when we cut this pattern out and we make it out of a piece of bias canvas, this bias material has a life of its own. It's super flexible. Look at this, it's like water. Our paper is just stiff. It doesn't change that much. There are going to be 3 reasons why you are going to have to reduce the curve of your break line based on the fact that your paper pattern is not going to behave the same as your material. Reason number 1 is always present and is inevitable. So we are going to always reduce the curve of our break line for that reason. The other 2, however, are optional and depend really on the situation. Reason number 1, whenever we cut our pattern out on a bias piece of canvas, we don't want the color to keep on being flexible once we have put it on the jacket. We want the color to be fixed as we have fixed it. What will happen a lot of times if you put the collar on and there is still a lot of flexibility in the collar, the edge of your fall is going to stretch out, and because this break line connects to the break line of the jacket, the break line of the jacket is also going to move forwards and it's going to end up on a higher position. That will make the lapel roll to a higher point. We don't want that, of course. So what we do is we want to take out the flexibility on this edge all the way by stretching it out with our iron. When we do that, we are increasing the surface length of the edge of the fall. When we do that, as you can see, we are introducing this surplus or elevation on the break line. We don't want that either. So what we do is we compress it and fix it with some sort of a tape to prevent this from stretching out. When we go through that process, we are making the curve of our break line more severe. So that means that we deviate from our pattern. Knowing that that is something that we are definitely going to do, we will reduce the curve of our break line. The other 2 reasons are optional, as I said. So the second reason is that depending on the position of the neck point and the color, of course, on the person, we may want to stretch out the edge of our fall to create a concave surface shape on our collar to have a nice smooth transition from the neck into the shoulders. Again, whenever we do that, we are increasing the surface length on the edge of our fall, which can cause some elevation and some surplus on the break line. When that happens, again, we will have to compress this, fix it, prevent it from stretching, and by doing that, we have changed and made the break line more severe. So for that reason, we will reduce the curve as well. The third reason is that you may be working on a collar for someone with very square shoulders. And on top of that, the jacket has a very high button point. And on top of that, you have a very wide fall. All these factors require you to have a more severe curve. Now, if you end up with a curve that is like a perfect U, you are not going to be able to make a one-piece collar out of that because your material is not going to have enough give to stretch the stand so that it can fold back flat. In that case, what you can do is to reduce the curve so that you can stretch your stand out and fold it back, or you're going to be stubborn and stick to the same curve but switch to a two-piece collar. That's all. I'm going to show you two collars cut from the same pattern with the same curve on their break line. The only thing that I've changed is the width of the fall. So the first collar has a very narrow fall and the second collar has a very wide fall. If I put the collar with the narrow fall around this neck, it goes nice and easy around the neck and falls right on this blue line. So when I go with my finger over it, it's nice and snug, no bubbles, no gaps, nothing. Take the same color with a wider fall and put it around the neck. Despite the fact that I have completely stretched the edge of the fall, my break line doesn't even get close, which means that I have to make the curve on my break line a lot more severe. Therefore, we can conclude that a collar with a wider fall needs a more severe curve. However, keep in mind, if the curve gets too severe, your material may not allow you to stretch it out so that you can fold the stand back on itself. In that case, you would have to switch to a two-piece collar. Now that we have covered all the fundamental principles of collars, I want to give you a word of caution before we move on to drafting the collar itself. Unfortunately, in tailoring, people tend to use vague terms. So they may say a straight collar, a round collar, banana collar, goat collar, I don't know, whatever. Those terms do not really imply what that collar is or does. If I tell you a round collar, what are you going to imagine? A collar that is round. Now, you know that all collars need to have a curve for the reasons that we explained. So if someone says, I don't want to have a round collar, you may think, oh, they actually want to have a collar without a curve. That is confusing, okay? Now, another important factor that you have to understand is that the collar on its own is one component of another part. So that part is the torso. The torso has a neck circle. The neck circle plays an equally important role in the final effect of the collar. So, if the neck circle has the wrong shape or is in the wrong area, a correctly put and constructed collar is going to look wrong. Now, imagine that the nape of the jacket you're working on starts all the way here. That is very low, unless it's done intentionally for some design effect. But for a standard coat, this is wrong. It should be higher. Now, whenever you put on your collar on that neck circle, your collar has to start all the way back here, make a massive curve, go over the shoulders, and then fall into the break line of the jacket. That looks round. So the person you're working with or the person you are working for may look at that and say, the collar is wrong. It is a round collar. And you're going to think, oh yeah, it is, it is wrong and it is round. So this whole Reza idiot that tells me about this curve is also wrong. But what you have to realize is that the collar may be correctly constructed on its own, but the neck circle is really causing the fault. So before you go ahead and confuse yourself with vague terminologies, I want you to practice the principles that I described to you earlier so that you can really distinguish when the color is wrong because it's constructed incorrectly, and when the color is wrong because another element, another part of it is causing that fault. That's all. All right, let's draft our pattern. On the right hand side, I have a undercollar that we're going to replicate here on the forepart and the back. And what you see here is the stand area and the fall. Now, this straight solid line is the center line of our pattern because we're only going to draft one half of it. And the dotted lines here, or the dashed lines, are the shoulder seam. What I want you to do is to lay your forepart and your back panel so that the sewing lines of your shoulders are aligned. So not edge to edge, but sewing lines on top of one another. Then trace it over on a piece of paper, and what you have to trace is the smaller part of the upper back, the back neck curve along with the gorge line, lapel, break line, shoulder seam, armhole, and a little bit of the side, just for your reference. So once you've done that, then we're going to start. The first thing that we're going to do is to extend the break line into the collar, because the break line of the collar is simply a continuation of the break line of the jacket. To do that, we are first going to take our dotted lines of our shoulder seam and we're going to extend that a little bit further out. Once we've done that, we're going to align our ruler with the break line of our coat, and we are going to draw a straight line and stop right at the extension of our shoulder. That is this line. Then we're going to do one half of our stand edge. What we have to do is to start right on the neck point and then draw a line parallel to the break line downwards, like so. We're going to stop roughly about 1 inch 3/4, which is 2 centimeters, 2.5 centimeters, below the gorge line, which is the top edge of the lapel. And we're going to extend that line parallel to the gorge, like so. We need to have some sort of an overlap between the fall of the collar and the lapel so that we can attach the lapel to the collar. Once we've done that, it's time to draft the remaining part of our stand, which has the curve. To do that, what we're going to do is continue temporarily with a thinner line. The stand edge in a straight line parallel to the break line of the jacket upwards, like this. Just do a dashed line or a dotted line, like so. Then we're going to take the square line of our ruler and we're going to align it with that until we meet the nape, right here. Then we're going to measure how much the distance is between the nape and our line here. We're going to use half that measure on this side and just make a mark, like so, small dot. Once you've done that, you're going to take your tape measure and measure from your nape to your shoulder seam, like so. Stay there and just bend your tape so that it goes through the point that you've made, and you're going to make a mark right where your tape ends so that you end up with the same measure, like so. And then make a smooth curve into that point. All right? Once you've got that line, you can then take your ruler and square off from that line, which is going to be 1/2 of your pattern right here. Then you can erase your dotted lines and continue the rest of your break line as the purple line parallel to your stand edge, like so. Now you have the correct color based on the back neck curve, the angle of your break line, the shoulders, and the shape of your lapel. So we've done the stand now. It's time to move on to the fall. As I explained earlier, the fall can be shaped into whatever shape you want because it doesn't really affect the tapered cylinder that we want to achieve with the curve of the stand. So what the fall is, in our case, is the final shape of our pattern, more or less, plus some inlay. This is how we do it. We're going to extend the line that we have here, which is below the gorge, and make it a little bit wider because maybe we're going to let out the width of the lapels. Therefore, we need a little bit width on our collar to prevent it from falling short. Then we're going to imagine what we want the shape of our collar to be in its final state. Let's say maybe we want something like this, for example. What we're going to do is we're going to go above that point, and we're going to make sure that we have more or less inch and a half, which is about, what, 3.5 centimeters above the point of our collar. And then we're going to move over to the center back. On the center back, the width of the fall is whatever the stand is, plus some inlay. Now, I recommend to have around 3/4 of inlay, not more than that, because remember, the wider your fall, the more severe your curve has to be, and you don't want to confuse yourself during the fittings because your collar is not going to be that wide. So fall plus, let's say 3/4, 2 centimeters of inlay, like so, and then we're going to use the same shape to curve that into the back, like so. That is your collar done. Now, keep in mind that you may have to reduce some of this curve because of the shaping that I explained earlier, but this should be the starting point for you to have the correct color for the jacket you're working on. One thing that you have to understand when using this draft is that this draft has not accommodated for the shaping of the actual collar that we're going to do in the next lesson. So what you have to understand is that, for example, if I just take the traditional model's collar as a reference, once we get to make this collar, we have this concave edge that we have to get. To get this concave edge, we have to stretch the stand of the collar so that it can fold back. Now, this stretching, along with some of the shaping here, will lengthen this area. This lengthening causes this area, which is the gorge area, to drop and fall lower on the lapel. We don't want that. We want it to just exactly end as we drafted it. So what do you have to do? Once you have made your draft, for example, this is your draft, measure from your center back about 3/4 in. That's more or less enough. It's not a super exact measure, but it's enough for it to work 99% of the times. Anything between 5/8 and 3/4. That's about 1.5 centimeters, 2 centimeters. Measure that inwards, okay? Parallel to your center back. Mark that and just simply cut that off, like so. Now you have a shorter collar, but that's fine because by the time you try to fold your break line along this concave curve, you have to stretch this out, stretch this area out as I just showed, and everything will fall exactly as it should. However, if you have printed our pattern from our website or you have purchased a purple box, you do not need to do this with that pattern. That pattern already has incorporated everything you need to do on your pattern. This is just if you've drafted it yourself. Now, obviously, you don't need to draft a color pattern if you've purchased one of our bundles to follow the series along with me. Neither do you have to draft a pattern if you want to use your own materials, but you want to use the same pattern as I'm using in the videos. However, if you want to make a jacket for yourself based on your own patterns and you want to know how to make a color pattern, this is the way to do it. Now, I want to tell you a story. When I moved to London to work on Savile Row, I was expecting to learn all the things that I'm telling you within a year. Not because I was expecting it to be easy, but I was expecting everyone to know all the things that I'm telling you and also be able to articulate it for me so that I could absorb it just like you're absorbing it now. However, what I found out is that A lot of people may have the intuitive knowledge built into their body after long hours and long years of working, but a lot of them didn't really manage to translate that knowledge into lines of words, especially lines of words that you could understand. Now, what I'm trying to do with the team that I have with me with these series is to make all of that knowledge as accessible as possible to the entire world. Maybe I was somewhere where I couldn't really travel to London, find a flat to live, and then go to Savile Row. Imagine that you're in a similar position, but you still want to have the best knowledge available to you. The Cutter and Tailor blog is dead. It doesn't work anymore. People don't go there. Tailoring books don't really show you how to do something. I believe that with the technologies that we have available today, we can do that. And you can be part of that process by helping us with a small donation. Whatever you think it's worth, as long as you donate to us, you are contributing to this mission. And I think that that is going to really change the tailoring industry for good into the future. My name is Reza. This was today's lesson, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Take care.